Your Honor, he didn't marry me. He audited me. The laugh died so fast it sounded like glass snapping. Owen Mercer was still on his feet beside his lawyer, still smiling from the speech he had just given about my mental instability. But the smile slipped when my attorney slid the black ledger onto the evidence cart. I watched my husband's face drain in real time. He recognized the ledger. He knew what was inside. And for the first time since he had entered my life, Owen looked exactly like what he was. If you've ever seen a man realize the trap under his polished shoes is his own, tell me in the comments. And if you like slow burn revenge with a clean payoff, stay with me, because what happened next blew his whole life open. The first time I met Owen Mercer, he made grief feel organized. That sounds insane now, but grief is easiest to exploit when it's still wearing expensive clothes and pretending it has posture. I was 38, living in Charleston, and 2 years into running Bellamy House, a restored 19th century waterfront inn that my mother had built from near ruin into one of the most sought-after boutique properties in the city. It wasn't just a hotel, it was the family nerve center, weddings on the lawn, wine tastings in the courtyard, secret proposals on the widow's walk, hand-painted room keys no sane accountant would ever approve of. Every corner carried my mother's fingerprints, even after cancer took her in 11 vicious months. When she died, everybody said the same thing. At least she left you something beautiful. As if beauty canceled the cost. Bellamy House was beautiful, yes. It was also 6 buildings, 17 employees, a restaurant lease, a liquor license, a preservation easement, 3 active lawsuits from a contractor my mother should never have trusted, and enough deferred maintenance hidden behind plaster to make any insurance adjuster grin like a shark. I loved the place like blood. I also woke up at 3 in the morning certain I was going to lose it. That was the state I was in on the night Owen Mercer stepped into my world wearing a navy suit and the kind of ease that makes everybody else look under-rehearsed. The Charleston Preservation Society was hosting a fundraising gala in our courtyard. White lights looped through the magnolia branches. A jazz trio played near the fountain. Half the city's old money was there pretending not to compete with the other half. I had been smiling for 4 hours straight. My cheeks numb, my heels cruel, my lungs tight from answering the question I hated most. How are you holding up? Not well, thank you for noticing, but the shrimp toast is excellent. I just escaped to the back corridor near the kitchens when I heard a male voice say, if one more person tells you your mother would be proud, you're legally allowed to throw a crab cake at them. I turned. He was taller than I expected, broad-shouldered without trying to advertise it. Early 40s maybe, dark hair touched with gray at the temples, no wedding ring, no loosened tie, no sloppiness. He carried himself like a man who had never needed to repeat himself in his life. That specific? I asked. Only because I've been counting. You're at 9. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It had been days since anything honest had come out of my mouth. He held up a hand. Owen Mercer, sorry. I know ambushing a woman in her own service hallway is not a strong opening move. You're not wrong. Then let me improve it. I knew your mother a little, professionally. She once told me anybody who hovered near a kitchen during an event was either useful or dangerous, and I was trying to figure out which one I was. And he glanced toward the ballroom, where somebody had just clinked a champagne flute for attention. Tonight? Useful, if you need someone to intercept donors who want to cry at you. That was the first thing he offered me, not charm, relief. Later, I learned he was a crisis management consultant for high-net-worth families and legacy businesses, the kind of person people hired when an estate was in trouble, when a company had suffered a scandal, when siblings were circling an inheritance with knives tucked under their smiles. At the time, all I knew was that within 10 minutes, he had redirected 3 conversation-hungry board members, quietly flagged that our event captain was double-booking the dessert runners, and handed me a glass of sparkling water before I realized I was thirsty. He did it all without performing helpfulness. That was his genius. He never looked eager. He looked inevitable. We started talking in pockets. During the gala, then after it, then the next week, when he called to say he'd found a donor's bracelet under a linen cart and wanted to drop it off personally, instead of risking staff confusion. 2 days after that, he sent coffee to the front desk at 6:15 a.m., with a note tucked around the cup sleeve. For the woman keeping a whole house standing. The note should have annoyed me. It should have felt like a line. Instead, it felt like the first sentence somebody had spoken to me in months, that saw me as something other than bereaved daughter, wealthy owner, local attraction, or female cautionary tale. He asked questions no one else asked. What had my mother gotten gloriously wrong when she first restored the place? What room did I avoid when I was sad? Which expense on the monthly report made me angriest? What did success actually look like to me if I stopped saying survival out loud? He listened like the answer was a map. My best friend Tessa Alvarez hated him on sight. Not socially, of course. Tessa was too polished for that. Tessa hated him the way a veteran homicide detective hates a clean crime scene. She came to Bellamy House on a drizzly Thursday, dropped into a velvet chair in my office and said, "That man has the eye contact discipline of a cult leader. He's a consultant. He's a vulture in Brunello Cucinelli." I snorted. "You've met him once. That's enough. Nora, men like that don't drift into hotel fundraisers by accident. They arrive with a reason." Tessa had been my closest friend since college, back when we both thought ambition was a personality and sleep was optional. She was now an assistant U.S. attorney with a laugh like broken glass and a talent for spotting the exact flaw in whatever story a man wanted to sell. She distrusted ease on principle. "You distrust everybody," I said. "Incorrect. I trust women with bad bangs and old librarians. I do not trust a man whose shoes look like they were emotionally supported as children." I laughed, but her words stayed with me because part of me already knew what she meant. Owen never overreached. He calibrated. He waited 3 weeks before asking me to dinner, and when he did, he chose a place across town that served absurdly simple food to people with absurdly complicated lives. He didn't touch my back when I walked in. He didn't compliment my dress first. He asked if I was sleeping any better. He remembered the name of my head groundskeeper. He knew my mother had once wanted to expand the East Garden but had run out of time. "How do you know that?" I asked. He tore a piece of bread in half. "She mentioned it when we discussed a continuity plan." The phrase continuity plan should have sounded sterile, but the way he said it made it sound like devotion. Like he too had once stood close enough to Bellamy House to understand the stakes. By dessert, I found myself telling him things I hadn't said aloud. That I still used my mother's old office because moving into mine downstairs made her death feel too administrative. That investors had been circling with friendly offers to buy a minority stake. That half the city assumed a woman alone with a legacy asset would eventually need rescuing or replacing. Owen didn't jump in with reassurance. He leaned back, studied me for a beat, and said, "You don't need rescuing. You need insulation from people who mistake grief for weakness." That sentence hit harder than any flirtation could have. He was careful, almost infuriatingly so. He did not rush me into romance. He built a case. He sent over the name of a roofing specialist after a storm-stripped slate from the West Carriage House. He reviewed a predatory lease amendment for me over lunch and circled the clause that would have quietly handed away alcohol rights during private events. He remembered that I hated peonies because they smelled like funerals. He brought me mandarins when I had the flu and left them at the desk instead of insisting on being invited upstairs. He became useful in ways that felt tender. 6 months later, I was in love with him in the exhausted, grateful, dangerous way women often love the first person who makes drowning feel embarrassing. He proposed on the Widow's Walk at sunset. The harbor looked like spilled copper. A church bell rang somewhere inland. I was already half crying because I'd spent the day finalizing renovation plans for the detached kitchen house, and every decision still felt like asking permission from a dead woman. Owen took my hands and said, "I know this place came to you through loss. I know that makes everything about the future feel like betrayal. But Nora, loving what your mother built doesn't mean you have to live inside the moment you lost her." His voice was low, steady, intimate enough to make the whole city disappear. "I don't want to stand adjacent to your life anymore. I want in, fully. The mess, the pressure, the joy, the lawsuits, the charm, the stubborn plumbing, the tourists who complain about historic floorboards creaking in a historic building. I want all of it. I want you." Then he reached into his pocket. Not for the ring. For a thin cream envelope. I actually laughed, a startled little sound. "Are you serving me?" His mouth curved. "Not yet." Inside was a prenuptial agreement. He saw my expression and moved instantly, smoothly, as if he had rehearsed every possible emotional response and chosen the route least likely to alarm me. "Before you say no, hear me out. My work has shown me the ugliest version of what love becomes when money gets sick. I would never forgive myself if what your mother left you became the fault line under our marriage. I don't want your house because I love you. I want a document proving I never needed it." The logic was clean, adult, responsible. He framed it as protection for me, not leverage for him. "My assets stay mine," I said carefully. "Of course. Bellamy House stays separate. Absolutely. You won't manage it." He smiled. "I don't want to run your inn, Nora. I want to marry the woman stubborn enough to keep it." Then, only then, did the ring appear. It was antique, emerald cut, elegant without shouting. He slid it onto my finger while the sky darkened over the water, and for a moment I hated myself a little for how relieved I was that he had put the legal document before the diamond. It felt honest. Mature. Better than a fantasy. Tessa's reaction was volcanic. "You said yes to him and his paperwork?" "I had my attorney review it." "Which attorney?" "Martin Keene." She closed her eyes. "The tax lawyer your family has used since Reagan was in office?" "He's good. He is 90 if he's a day, and he still prints emails." 78. "Fantastic. A spry dinosaur." Martin did review it. He found it aggressive in certain technical areas, but acceptable overall. He suggested revisions. Owen accepted them with almost theatrical graciousness. Whatever makes you feel secure, he told me, sliding the marked-up document back across the table in his condo overlooking the Cooper River. This only works if you never doubt where I stand. That line mattered because he always knew the exact fear to address. We were married 4 months later in the courtyard at Bellamy House, under hanging lanterns and a stubborn breeze off the harbor. The city glowed. Guests cried. My chef nearly quit over a late caviar delivery. Owen looked at me like I had solved something in him nobody else could even identify. For the first year, life with him felt not merely happy, but increasingly efficient, which is the more seductive illusion. He did not try to seize control openly. He made competence feel romantic. When our insurance renewal came up and the underwriter demanded upgraded storm mitigation documentation, Owen assembled the packet in one afternoon. When a wedding planner threatened to sue over noise restrictions her client had signed off on twice, he handled it with 3 phone calls and 1 letter so devastatingly polite she folded by morning. When an investor from Atlanta made another offer to acquire a 40% stake in Bellamy House Holdings, Owen didn't tell me what to do. He asked what independence was worth to me in actual numbers. Then he had a valuation specialist produce a report showing the offer undervalued the property by almost 15%. You don't need a buyer, he said. You need stronger structure. Structure became his favorite word. Not ownership, not control, structure. By then, he'd also become close with my operations director, Janine, my restaurant lessee, Eric, even old Mr. Grady from accounting, who trusted nobody born after disco and still called me Miss Nora, despite the fact that I signed his checks. Owen knew exactly how to approach each person. Deference for one, humor for another, technical fluency for the next. He didn't replace my world. He threaded himself through it until extracting him felt like ripping seams. Then came the first shove. It arrived wrapped in concern. A tropical storm clipped the coast late that August. Not enough to devastate the city, but enough to flood our lower storage rooms, cancel 12 bookings, and reveal that the west retaining wall had been repaired cosmetically 3 years earlier instead of properly rebuilt. The estimate to fix it made me physically ill. I sat in my office after midnight with spreadsheets open, and a bourbon I wasn't drinking when Owen came in, loosened his tie, and set a folder beside my laptop. What's this? I asked. A resilience vehicle. That sounds fake. He smiled. It's not fake. It's boring, which is even worse. Inside was a proposal from a private advisory firm in Charlotte called Mercer Strategic Continuity Group. Owen was not listed as owner, only senior partner. The pitch was elegantly phrased. Create a separate holding entity for Bellamy House's non-historic revenue streams, event licensing, branded merchandise, future satellite properties, and reserve capital, allowing the core real estate to remain protected while revenue became easier to manage, scale, and shield. It keeps the inn safer, he said. The house remains the crown. The revenue channels get modernized. I flipped through the pages. And who manages this entity? A board. Whose board? You, me, and an outside financial chair. My gaze sharpened. You. He took the folder gently from my hand, sat on the edge of the desk, and met my eyes. Nora, I know what this sounds like, so listen carefully. I am not asking to own your mother's house. I am asking to build a firewall around the parts most likely to get sued, squeezed, or dragged under if the market turns ugly. Every woman I've ever seen lose a legacy asset lost it because she waited too long to professionalize. There it was. Not pressure. Fear in a tailored suit. I don't like your examples always being women, I said. His expression shifted, something pained and sincere. Because too many men still assume sentiment will do their negotiating for them. He was so good at this. So good it makes me angry even now. I told him I'd think about it. For 3 weeks he did not mention the folder again. Then the city announced new coastal insurance surcharges for historic hospitality properties. Then one of our major wedding planners moved half her high-end clients to a new resort on Kiowa. Then the contractor lawsuit resurfaced with amended damages. It was a drumbeat of vulnerability, and each beat made his proposed structure feel less like ambition and more like common sense. Tessa read the proposal over margaritas in my kitchen and said, "This is a hand entering your bloodstream. You say that about everything. Because everything keeps trying to poison you. It keeps the real estate separate. It puts future revenue, reserve capital, and expansion rights into a board-governed entity, with your husband positioned as operational equal. Nora, if the inn is the heart, this is still the arteries. You're being dramatic. I'm a federal prosecutor. Drama is just pattern recognition with better shoes. I wish I had listened harder. But love doesn't make you stupid. It makes the stupid option feel morally generous. I signed. At first, nothing visibly changed. That was the trick. Mercer Strategic didn't touch guest experience, room design, vendor relationships, or anything romantic enough to make me defensive. They touched back-end flow, ticketing for events, seasonal package pricing, reserve allocation, vendor payment timing, insurance bundling, the branded candle line my mother had started as a joke, and which brides now bought by the case. Owen kept saying the same thing. Let the house be the house. It sounded noble. What it meant was, let me handle the bloodstream while you remain emotionally attached to the face. A year into the marriage, I got pregnant. That sentence should land like joy. In some ways it did. In other ways it split time in half. I had endometriosis and a history of ovarian surgery. I'd been told not impossible, just unlikely, which is doctor language for don't build your life around it. When the test turned positive in the downstairs powder room at Bellamy House, I sat on the closed toilet lid laughing and crying so hard Janine knocked on the door because she thought somebody had died. Owen's reaction was pure sunlight. He lifted me off my feet in the kitchen, kissed my face, my hair, my hands, dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to my stomach as if prayer had finally received a mailing address. This changes everything, he whispered. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. For a while he was gentler than ever. He blocked off my mornings. He insisted on reducing my event load. He started handling more calls because you're building a person, not a spreadsheet. He brought soup, tracked my medications, came to appointments, and once drove 40 minutes at 10 at night because I texted that the only thing I could stomach was a fast food hash brown. The problem is that good lies are made from real behavior. If Owen had been cruel all the time, I would have left. If he had slipped constantly, I would have seen it. What made him dangerous was that parts of him were truly attentive. He could love the feeling of being needed and still be using that need as leverage. Those things are not opposites. At 14 weeks, he introduced the second shove. We were in bed. Rain ticked against the shutters. I was propped against pillows trying not to vomit. Tell me something, he said, thumb brushing circles over my wrist. If something happened to you and me tomorrow, what would happen to Bellamy House? The question chilled me instantly. Why would you ask that? Because we're having a child. It goes into trust. He was quiet for a beat. A blunt trust, yes. But operationally? Who controls continuity? Who protects it from cousins, emergency sales, probate delays, opportunists? My mother did. And she nearly died 3 separate times before she signed her final contingency documents. That's not fair. No, he said softly. It's not. But fairness has nothing to do with whether a legacy survives. The next week, he set a meeting with a family wealth planner from Dallas named Curtis Vale, a man with silver hair, perfect cuffs, and the smile of someone who had never once sweated through his shirt in August. Curtis walked me through a beautiful presentation on multi-generational protection, philanthropic vision, asset ring fencing, and tax efficiency. He spoke in the soothing dialect of high net worth inevitability. The recommendation was a family legacy trust layered over the existing prenup structure and linked to the operating entity. It was sold to me as a fortress for the baby. The language was dense, but the emotional pitch was simple. If I loved my child, I would prevent chaos before grief could weaponize it. Martin Keene reviewed it and said it was sophisticated but not inherently improper. Tessa read the summary and said, "This man keeps handing you prettier cages." I should tell you the exact moment my certainty cracked. It was not a dramatic betrayal. No lipstick on a collar, no strange text on a glowing screen. It was a number. At 21 weeks, I met with Reggie Sloan, the financial controller who had worked with my mother for 16 years, and whose default mode was pessimism sharpened by coffee. Reggie was 64, former Navy, allergic to adjectives, and deeply offended by decorative spreadsheets. He came into my office, shut the door, and set down a binder. "Need you to explain something to me, Nora." That was enough to make my skin prickle. He opened to a section highlighted in yellow. Reserve transfers from Bellamy House event licensing into the Mercer Strategic Continuity account. Larger than I remembered approving. More frequent. Not catastrophic, but not casual either. That just seasonal smoothing? I asked. He looked at me for 3 long seconds. Maybe. If your husband's people have suddenly decided winter is going to last 11 months. I sat up straighter. What are you saying? I'm saying money is moving into structures I don't like fast enough to make me wonder who's hurrying. The air in the office changed. I reached for the binder. He tapped another page. And this clause? The Legacy Trust Addendum references management discretion during periods of medical incapacity. I frowned. Standard. Maybe. Depends who writes the definition. It turned out the definition was broad. Very broad. Temporary inability to perform executive oversight due to medical limitation, emotional impairment, or clinically advised rest. Pregnancy complications could qualify. Postpartum depression could qualify. Bed rest could qualify. A doctor's recommendation could open the door. Who chose this language? Reggie asked. Curtis, I guess. Owen. He leaned back, disgust plain on his face. Well, isn't that convenient? I took the documents home in a bag that suddenly felt heavier than paper should. That night I brought it up over dinner. Owen read my face before I said a word. He always did. Reggie spooked you, he said, cutting into salmon with surgical calm. He says the incapacity language is too broad. Reggie thinks online banking was the beginning of moral decline. This isn't funny. He set down his fork and softened instantly. You're right. I'm sorry. He reached across the table and covered my hand. Nora, sweetheart. The language is broad because life is broad. If, God forbid, you're in the hospital after delivery, should the business freeze? Should payroll stall because your body did something miraculous and difficult? It says emotional impairment. Because lawyers don't write poetry. They write ugly umbrellas to cover every storm. He squeezed my hand. No one is taking Bellamy House from you. I am trying to protect it while you and our child stay safe. There it was again. Protection as solvent. Every objection dissolved inside it. I let the conversation end there. 2 weeks later, I lost the baby. There are no clever sentences for that part. The body does not care how articulate you are. It started with cramps during a wedding rehearsal and ended under fluorescent hospital lights, with a nurse saying my name too gently. I remember the smell of antiseptic. Owen's face white with shock. A machine beeping somewhere that had nothing to do with me and felt, offensively, like the world continuing. For a month after, I moved through life like something partially evacuated. Bellamy House kept running because people still wanted sunset vows and custom cocktails and honeymoon suites with harbor views. Grief is humiliating that way. It changes your whole internal weather, and the outside world still asks if valet is included. Owen became perfect. That is not an exaggeration. He canceled meetings. He fielded calls. He screened guests from me if he sensed I couldn't fake normal. He drew baths, sat with me through nights I didn't sleep, ordered food I didn't eat, and held me through the kind of sobbing that empties more than lungs. He was also, I now know, repositioning the board. Curtis Vale circulated a revised contingency memo during my recovery period. Reggie objected. Owen overruled him under temporary operational necessity. Event reserve authority shifted. Vendor approvals above a certain threshold started routing through Mercer Strategic. Janine, exhausted and trying to keep weddings from collapsing, accepted what she was told. Grief made me absent, and absence was translated into consent. I did not see it then. I barely saw myself. The first ugly glimpse came by accident. 3 months after the miscarriage, I went to Owen's downtown office to surprise him with lunch. He had forgotten his phone that morning, and the front desk told me he was in a client call upstairs and I could wait in his private conference room if I wanted. I sat. I stared at the harbor. I tried not to think about babies. His laptop was open on the table. I was not snooping. Not at first. A message notification slid into the corner of the screen. A 1 unstable after loss. Increased dependence. Delay resistance discussion until medical narrative settles. For a full second, my mind refused to process what my eyes had just read. I clicked. The message disappeared into a larger chain inside a folder titled MCG Private. My pulse crashed against my throat. There were threads between Owen, Curtis, a forensic accountant named Neil Harrow, and someone listed only as DT. They were discussing me. Not me emotionally, me structurally. Asset temperament. Resistance thresholds. Sentimental anchors. Optimum windows for board action. There was a reference to legacy hospitality target profile. Another to case studies. My skin went so cold I had to grip the chair. Then I saw it. A subfolder labeled Due Diligence, Bellamy. Inside were PDFs stretching back 14 months before the preservation gala where we'd met. Property maps, insurance summaries, old interviews with my mother, probate filings, vendor debt, internal staffing notes, tax abstracts, even a charity newsletter photo of me from 3 years earlier at a youth literacy fundraiser. He had been gathering me before he ever touched me. I don't know how long I sat there. 20 seconds. 10 years. The office door opened behind me. Nora? His voice was warm, curious, deadly. I turned too fast. The chair wheels skidded. My hands were still on his keyboard. He took in the screen, my face, the open folder, and in that one suspended second, I saw the real machine behind the man. Not anger first. Assessment. What did I see? How much? What approach works fastest? Then the mask returned, seamless. You scared me, I blurted. He glanced at the laptop, then smiled with the exact right amount of embarrassment. You caught me being more obsessive than is socially forgivable. I stared at him. He crossed the room slowly, palms open. Nora, I should have told you. In my line of work, background diligence is reflex. When I realized I was serious about you, I did what I do with everyone around high-value litigation risk. I checked for liabilities, hidden debt, prior claims, vulnerabilities that could hurt you or the business. It was protective. Clumsy, maybe, but protective. What is A1? I asked. He blinked once. Not enough for anybody else to notice. More than enough for me. A shorthand from an old intake template. You know how consultants are. I didn't know how consultants were. I knew how liars sounded when they were deciding whether honesty was still necessary. He came closer. You've been through too much to have this rattling around in your head without context. He touched my cheek. Come home with me. I'll show you everything. That sentence should have sent me running. Instead, I let him take me home because terror often wears the same shoes as denial. That night he performed concern so flawlessly it almost erased the evidence. He explained due diligence as standard risk review. He framed the message as badly phrased strategic jargon from a board discussion about my recovery. He seemed wounded that I would imagine something uglier. He asked if this was really about the laptop or about the grief neither of us had processed. That last move was viciously elegant. Turned suspicion into a symptom. I apologized. I hate that part of the story. I apologized. For the next 10 days I tried to convince myself I had overreacted. Tessa called that the hostage phase of self-gaslighting. She was right, but I hadn't told her yet. I hadn't told anyone. Then Owen filed the papers. They were not divorce papers. Not yet. They were emergency governance documents. He submitted them to the Bellamy House Holdings Board after hours on a Thursday when I had a migraine and had gone upstairs early. The memo cited my recent, documented emotional volatility, my medical grief history, and the need for temporary executive stabilization to preserve vendor confidence and debt ratios during peak booking season. Temporary. Stabilization. Preserve. Every predatory act in America loves a neutral noun. Janine called me at 7:12 a.m. the next morning, voice shaking. Nora, why is there a board vote scheduled for noon to appoint Owen interim executive authority? For one blazing second, my fear burned off and left behind something colder, because now it was undeniable. I drove downtown in pajamas under a coat, hair unbrushed, fury keeping me upright. Owen was in the kitchen when I got there, crisp white shirt, coffee halfway to his mouth. He looked annoyed, not startled, as if he'd hoped to manage the timing more gracefully. You filed against me, I said. His gaze flicked toward the staff hall. He set down the mug. Lower your voice. No, this is not how you want to handle this. How I want to handle this. You are trying to take my company while I'm still sleeping in the house my mother left me. He exhaled slowly, the way one might with a difficult patient. I am trying to keep a distressed asset from collapsing because its owner has become unpredictably compromised. There are sentences that change the molecular structure of a marriage. That was ours. I'm what? Nora. His tone softened. Listen to me carefully. I know you don't feel unstable. Most people in prolonged grief don't. But investors are nervous. Bookings have softened. Reggie is obstructive. Janine is loyal to you, not the business. You need rest, not warfare. Get out. He looked at me as if I had embarrassed myself. The board isn't going to side with sentiment over continuity. That word again. Continuity. The polished synonym for theft. I took one step closer. You think because I'm grieving, I won't fight you. I think, he said quietly, that by the time you understand what I've already built, fighting will be expensive enough to make surrender look noble. Then he walked out. That was the moment the marriage ended, though the law took longer to catch up. I called Tessa from the pantry because it was the only room where my voice could break without staff hearing it. She arrived 39 minutes later with a legal pad, a blazer thrown over workout clothes, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting all year to become exactly this angry. Start at the beginning, she said. I did. She did not interrupt once. Not through the gala. Not through the prenup. Not through the trust. Not through the miscarriage. Not through the laptop. When I finished, she sat very still for 3 seconds and said, Okay, we are not dealing with a bad husband. We are dealing with a system. That distinction saved me. Not a marriage gone sour. A design. Tessa brought in 2 people that same day. The first was Mira Bell, a civil litigator from Atlanta who specialized in fiduciary abuse and whose courtroom style was rumored to have made 2 CEOs cry without raising her voice. The second was Gabriel Pike, a forensic investigator with a shaved head, quiet manners, and the unnerving habit of seeming half asleep until somebody lied within 30 feet of him. Mira reviewed the governance memo and said, He moved too early. Good. Arrogance leaves fingerprints. Gabriel reviewed the board packet and said, He's used this template before. The room went silent. How do you know? I asked. Formatting patterns? Attachment naming conventions? And because no man invents a phrase like stakeholder emotional erosion on a Thursday? That was the first tiny pulse of hope. We went quiet publicly. That part mattered. Mira forbade me from dramatic confrontation, social media hints, tearful calls to mutual friends, or anything that would warn Owen I had stopped reacting and started building. Predators adjust when prey becomes legible, she said. We are going to be boring until we are catastrophic. So I played hurt. Not broken. Hurt. I delayed the board meeting citing a medical appointment. I sent Owen one brief text. I need time. Please stop escalating. He replied in under a minute. Then cooperate with the structure designed to protect you. I showed the message to Mira. She smiled without warmth. Wonderful. He still thinks he's teaching you your lines. The next phase nearly broke me because it required proximity. To prove intent, Mira wanted Owen relaxed enough to keep moving money and making strategic assumptions. That meant I had to continue limited direct contact. Not friendly contact, not tender. Just enough to reinforce his belief that I was overwhelmed, emotionally reactive, and still playing defense. He called 3 days after the first hearing. I don't want this to become a blood sport, he said. I had him on speaker while Gabriel sat across from me taking notes with the emotional energy of a stone fence. What do you want, Owen? A path that preserves your dignity. Gabriel rolled his eyes so hard it was almost athletic. I'm not sure dignity is your department, I said. He let that pass. There's a bridge solution, interim debt facility, quiet restructuring, no public sale, no forced operational spectacle. If you stop listening to people who want a war, I can still keep this contained. Mira had predicted almost those exact words. Contained meant hidden. Bridge solution meant collateral. The draft arrived an hour later. It was a short-term liquidity instrument backed by future event revenue, licensing rights, and contingent authority triggers if performance benchmarks slipped. Same move, Reggie muttered when he saw it. New box. But the box had value to us. Owen needed me to nibble. So I nibbled. I asked 2 technical questions by email. I requested a revised benchmark window. I thanked him for trying to reduce chaos. He replied with immediate, smooth patience. Every message went into evidence. He wanted that bridge deal badly enough that he made his first real mistake in writing. In one email to Curtis, which was later produced in Discovery after they forgot to strip an attachment chain, Owen wrote, If Bellamy signs the facility before the monitor recommendation, we regain conversion leverage even if domestic optics worsen. Domestic optics. Conversion leverage. That email alone was worth a week of sleep. Then he made a second mistake because he was greedy and impatient at the same time, which is the combination that has ended more polished men than morality ever did. Bellamy House owned a narrow adjacent parcel on East Bay that my mother had bought years earlier to prevent a developer from putting a glassy monstrosity against the inn's garden wall. It was not glamorous land. Too narrow for anything obvious. Too valuable to ignore if you understood future assemblage potential downtown. Owen understood. Of course he did. A commercial broker named Randall Kay approached Reggie, informally, about whether Bellamy House might entertain quiet offers on the parcel if litigation pressure increased. Reggie played dumb, then called Gabriel. Gabriel met Kay posing as a consultant loosely attached to our stability planning team. Kay liked money too much to ask careful questions. Within 40 minutes, he was hinting that Owen had floated expectations around a distressed sale and that all parties who had earned a seat at the table would be protected. All parties? Gabriel asked. Kay laughed into his bourbon. Let's not be precious. Mercer doesn't spend this much time babysitting a widow because he likes porch swings. Gabriel got that on audio. When he played it for us later in Mira's office, Tessa actually put her feet on the desk and said, I would like this man launched into the moon. Mira didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth moved. Later. Meanwhile, Charleston started doing what Charleston does best when blood hits good linen. It turned private abuse into social conversation disguised as concern. A woman I'd known for 10 years tilted her head at a fundraiser and said, I just hope you're taking the time to heal before making permanent decisions. A bank VP who had courted our business for years suddenly became more comfortable, routing certain conversations through interim counsel instead of me directly. One bride's mother asked Janine, in a voice loud enough to carry, whether the owner's personal episode would affect the rehearsal dinner. That one made Janine cry in the walk-in freezer. Public humiliation is useful to men like Owen because it outsources enforcement. If enough people start narrating you as fragile, you begin spending energy disproving weakness instead of defending the border. Mira wouldn't let me do either. Let them underestimate the room temperature before the stove blows, she said. So I kept moving. I hosted a luncheon, reviewed wine allocations, met with a landscape architect, signed payroll, smiled in photographs. Internally, I was a live wire. Externally, I was a woman in cream cashmere asking whether the fennel salad needed more citrus. Then came the psychiatric ambush. Kroll filed a motion seeking an independent mental health evaluation tied to executive competency disputes, citing my documented grief history and what he called contradictory behavioral signals. He wanted a court-appointed evaluator. Neutral, on paper. Predictably chosen, in practice. Mira argued like hell. The judge narrowed the scope but allowed a limited evaluation because family and fiduciary disputes love pretending clinical language can launder power. The evaluator assigned was not Tormy, thank God, but the hearing still made me feel skinned. I sat in a bland office answering questions about sleep, mood, appetite, the baby, my marriage, my mother, the inn, my panic, my anger, my concentration, whether I ever wanted to disappear, whether I sometimes feared people were coordinating against me. That last one almost made me laugh. Coordinating against me was not paranoia. It was the case file. The evaluator, Dr. Marissa Hoke, was sharper than Owen expected. She asked why multiple people around me seemed so invested in translating grief into management incompetence. She asked why my husband's account of my deterioration was rich in adjectives but poor in contemporaneous medical corroboration. She asked why so many communications about my instability emerged only after governance authority became financially valuable. When her preliminary summary landed, it didn't crown me perfectly healthy and triumphant. Real life is rarely that obliging. It said I was grieving, highly stressed, and entirely capable of executive decision-making absent coercive environmental conditions. Coercive environmental conditions. Mira framed the phrase and nearly hung it in the office. Owen reacted badly. Not publicly. In the dark. He came to Bellamy House one rainy evening under the pretense of retrieving archived tax documents that had once been kept in our shared townhouse. I met him in the downstairs library because there was no chance I was bringing him upstairs. He stood near the fireplace, coat damp, jaw tight, looking less like a charming consultant, and more like what he probably had always been underneath. A man infuriated that a woman he had categorized had started generating unwelcome variables. "You've turned this into spectacle," he said. "No, I think your profession did that." He ignored it. "Do you know what happens when a property like this gets a reputation for instability? Premium clientele disappear. Institutional lenders freeze. Vendors quietly load risk into your pricing. You're not fighting me anymore, Nora. You're fighting gravity." That line was classic Owen, threat disguised as macroeconomics. I leaned against the mantel and crossed my arms. "Funny, every time you say gravity, I hear extortion." His eyes sharpened. "You still think this is personal?" I let silence sit between us until it irritated him. Then I asked very quietly, "How many?" He didn't blink. "How many what? How many women before me?" He looked past me at the shelves. "You are not interchangeable." That was not an answer. It was worse. "Did you ever look at me?" I asked, without calculating the in. Something moved in his face then. Not remorse. Annoyance that I was forcing translation. "You want a sentimental answer because it would make the story cleaner." He took a slow breath. "Adults are always evaluating consequences, Nora. Some of us are just honest about it." Honest. That word nearly made me black out with rage. "I'm going to win," he said, softer now, almost tired. "Maybe not the whole thing. Maybe not elegantly. But you cannot litigate this house forever. You don't have the stomach for total war." He was wrong about many things. That one cost him most. Because by then, while he was still trying to frighten me into shrinking, Gabriel had found the part of the machine that made total war possible. Insurance. Not hospitality insurance. Personal umbrella policies. In 2 prior cases, Mercer's strategic linked advisors had quietly pressured owners to amend umbrella coverage and directors' and officers' policies before governance transitions. Why? Because policy language changes affected who could finance what defense, what indemnification could be claimed, and how aggressively a woman could afford to resist once conflict turned formal. Bellamy House's policies had been revised 11 months earlier, by Curtis Vale's recommendation, through a brokerage Owen had described as best in class. Those revisions capped certain defense reimbursements and introduced exclusions triggered by intra-board disputes. In plain English, they had tried to pre-weaken my ability to fund a fight before the fight existed. When Mira read the policy chain, she gave a low whistle. "This is not just predation, this is premeditated battlefield prep." Martin Keene, who had by then become so offended he looked 20 years younger, helped unwind the revisions and prepared a devastating affidavit on the pattern of anticipatory insulation. It was the kind of affidavit courts love because it sounds dry and means murder. Then we got lucky in the way people only call luck after months of work. A storage unit. Celia had mentioned, almost in passing, that Mercer Strategic kept legacy paper off-site when partners didn't trust cloud hygiene. Gabriel traced a unit in Charlotte leased through a dead LLC that still, because human stupidity is renewable, auto-paid from a live account linked to one of Owen's affiliated entities. A warrant would take time. Civil access took less, because the entity records were sloppy enough to support emergency motion practice once Mira connected the payments to disputed discovery responses. Inside that unit were banker boxes full of old engagement binders, printed target profiles, draft memos, and handwritten notes Owen should never have allowed to survive. Predators who live by systems eventually fall in love with archiving themselves. One yellow legal pad contained rough notes from what looked like a workshop or internal training. Among the bullet points: do not challenge sentiment directly. Validate it, then redefine it as risk. Pregnancy amplifies compliance if framed as future protection. Loss windows compress resistance. Use gentleness. If principle discovers diligence early, reroute through concern and mental load. I read that page once and had to go outside because my body suddenly felt too small to hold my anger. Tessa followed me into the alley behind Mira's office and handed me water. You know what the worst part is? I said. She shook her head. He was accurate, not morally, mechanically. He was accurate about what women are trained to forgive. Tessa's mouth went hard. Then let's make accuracy expensive. The storage unit evidence also gave us something even better than cruelty. It gave us training materials bearing initials from other consultants and cross-references to feed distributions after asset conversion events. Not just Owen's rot, network rot. That shifted the strategic horizon. The case was still primarily my divorce and property dispute, but now everyone on his side had to think about criminal exposure beyond one marriage. Cooperation started looking like oxygen. Curtis Vale lawyered up harder. Neil Harrow became almost cheerful. Dr. Tormey developed memory issues. Randall Kay suddenly discovered religion. And one of Mercer Strategic's former outside board nominees in the Lexington case signed an affidavit admitting he had been told the owner was too emotionally fused with the asset to act in her own best interests. Emotionally fused with the asset. That phrase turned out to be central. The women they targeted were not random rich women. They were women whose properties meant family, identity, location, memory, or unfinished love. Things that make a clean sale impossible, unless you first make attachment look pathological. Once I saw that, everything he had ever said to me rewrote itself in my head. The way he'd praised structure over chaos. The way he'd called Bellamy House too much burden for one nervous system. The way he'd asked whether I wanted to be owner or martyr. The way he'd stroked my wrist while discussing trusts. The way he'd comforted me after the miscarriage while moving papers in rooms I no longer entered. Every tenderness had a shadow under it. A month before the major hearing, Kroll tried one final strategy: settlement through humiliation. He sent over a confidential proposal offering me full title to Bellamy House real estate if I surrendered claims tied to diverted revenue, governance fraud, and broader disclosure. There was also a confidentiality clause, so aggressive it might as well have said bury yourself politely. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Owen. You keep the house. I keep the future. Nobody else has to know how close you came to losing both. Mira read the note and started laughing so hard she had to set down her coffee. What? I asked. He still thinks your deepest fear is embarrassment. It wasn't. Not anymore. My deepest fear had become something cleaner. That he might do this again if I got tired before he got stopped. So we rejected the offer without counter. That same week, I hosted the annual Bellamy Lantern Dinner, the biggest social event we still ran ourselves. Tessa thought I was insane for keeping it on the calendar mid-litigation. Mira thought it was excellent optics. Reggie thought everybody involved needed hobbies. The dinner mattered because it placed me in public, in charge, inside the thing he claimed I was too unstable to steward. It also mattered because Owen, incredibly, attended. Not as my date. As an invited donor through an old preservation board tie we legally couldn't dislodge in time without making ourselves look reactive. When I saw his name on the final seating chart, something savage and amused woke up in me. Leave him there, I said. The courtyard glowed that night. Lanterns swung above the tables. The fountain caught gold. The city's best-dressed hypocrites floated through Bellamy House drinking Sancerre and pretending legal scandal was tacky only when discussed at volume. I wore black. Not morning black. Armor black. Owen arrived with a donor couple from Charlotte, and the expression of a man determined to prove he could still occupy the room he had tried to own. People watched us without watching us. The old Charleston trick. I greeted every table personally. When I reached his, I gave the same smile I gave everyone else. Mr. Mercer, welcome to Bellamy House. The donor wife nearly choked on her champagne. He stood because etiquette had trapped him into it. Nora. I angled my head. I do hope the evening meets your continuity standards. For the first time in months, I saw him caught off script in public. Just for a second. Just enough. The best part came later. During dessert, Janine tapped a spoon to her glass and announced a new preservation initiative, funded in part by the first grants from the Lila Bellamy Legacy Fund. My mother's name, our program, our structure. Legal support for family-owned heritage properties facing predatory acquisition or coercive restructuring. Every eye in the courtyard shifted, subtly but unmistakably, toward Owen's table. I did not look at him. I did not need to. The applause rolled anyway. It was not evidence. It was not law. It was something pettier and more satisfying. Social oxygen leaving a man who had always counted on rooms warming to him by default. When the night finally ended, I stood alone for a minute in the empty courtyard while staff cleared glasses. Janine came to my side and whispered, "That may have healed something in me personally." I laughed so hard I scared a waiter. A week later, the fiduciary monitor filed her interim report. Objective, restrained, devastating. She found no support for emergency displacement of my authority, absent disputes manufactured by the restructuring process itself. She flagged undisclosed consultant relationships, concern over governance overreach during a medically vulnerable period, and irregularities in reserve handling that warranted immediate corrective oversight. Kroll fought to limit the report's use. Judge Pike did not indulge him. By the time the major hearing arrived, Owen's side wasn't one clean team anymore. It was a set of professionals trapped in a burning elevator wondering who had started the fire and whether stepping over one another would help. That is the point most people imagine I felt triumphant. I didn't. Not exactly. I felt tired enough to split in two, angry enough to light the courthouse with my pulse, and weirdly calm in the center. Because the question was no longer whether he had betrayed me. The question was whether the room was finally ready to stop calling predation by softer names. That answer came when the judge laughed. And once she laughed, everybody else had permission to stop being politely confused. Gabriel started digging. What he found first was not another woman. It was another case. 3 years earlier, a luxury horse farm in Lexington had undergone a sudden executive transition after its widowed owner took a temporary wellness leave. The farm was later sold at a depressed valuation to an investment group linked through layered entities to a continuity advisory firm based in Charlotte. Merzer Strategic. The widow had signed off on the sale during treatment for what court records described as exhaustion-related cognitive distress. The consulting psychiatrist was a Dr. Declan Tormey. DT. My stomach dropped. Gabriel kept going. 2 years before that, a Napa winery. Similar pattern. Legacy business. Widowed or recently bereaved owner. Accelerated governance shifts. Protective restructuring. Sale or control transfer. Management fees. Consultant trail. Psychiatric narrative. You seeing a theme? Tessa asked. No, Mira said. I'm seeing racketeering in a cashmere sweater. We needed proof, not vibes. Proof came from somewhere I never expected. Janine. I had assumed Janine was merely overwhelmed. I was wrong. She was scared. She came into my office after midnight 2 nights later while I was reviewing vendor contracts with Mira. Her mascara was smudged, her hands shaking. I need to show you something, she whispered. It was a printed email Owen had accidentally left in the copier room. Internal, not meant for her eyes. Subject line, Bellamy Transition Optics. In it, Owen outlined messaging for staff if I resisted the interim governance plan. He suggested referring concerned vendors to a prepared statement about my temporary health retreat, and warned that emotional displays from principal may intensify as authority is normalized. I read the line twice. Authority is normalized. He was already writing my disappearance into the script. Janine started crying. I thought maybe he was just trying to protect the place. I swear to God, Nora. I thought maybe you two were telling each other different versions of the same thing, and I was stuck in the middle. But this, she looked sick. He talks about you like weather damage. I reached for her, and for a second we just stood there in my mother's office holding onto each other while the inn settled around us, old beams clicking softly in the walls. Mira took the printout, scanned it, and said, "Better, not enough, but better." Then Gabriel cracked the real door. He found a former assistant of Owen's living in Wilmington, North Carolina. Her name was Celia Ward. She had lasted 8 months with Mercer Strategic before leaving abruptly, officially for family reasons, unofficially because, as Gabriel put it, she had developed a conscience with excellent timing. We met Celia in the back room of a seafood place off the highway, where nobody in Charleston would recognize us. She was 32, sharp-eyed, wrung tight, the kind of woman who had once been capable of enormous efficiency, and was now trying to decide whether decency would bankrupt her. I'm not testifying yet, she said immediately. I have 2 kids and a mortgage. Understood, Mira said. Celia looked at me, really looked, and something in her face softened. He called you Harbor. I went still. What? The target names. Internally. Harbor. Vineyard. Thoroughbred. Redwood. He liked metaphors. Made him feel clever. Disgust flickered across her mouth. He built profiles on women with inherited or emotionally anchored assets. The script changed depending on the asset type. Hospitality properties were Harbor. Wineries were Vineyard. Horse properties were Thoroughbred. My nails dug into my palms so hard they left crescents. You're saying he targeted me? She gave me a bleak look. No, I'm saying he prepared for you. Then she passed Gabriel a small encrypted drive. It's not everything, she said, but it's enough to ruin his month. That drive held the bones of the whole machine. Templates for due diligence reports on prospective romantic targets. Messaging frameworks for prenup conversations designed to lower suspicion by centering female autonomy. Crisis playbooks for grief windows, medical vulnerability, and board capture. Invoices linking Mercer Strategic to Dr. Declan Tormey and to Neil Harrow, the forensic accountant. A spreadsheet of management fee extractions from entities later stabilized through sale or control transfer. And a memo written by Owen himself, dry as winter, titled Conversion Timing and Sentiment Resistance. One line from that memo still lives in my body. Emotionally inherited assets require relationship-first acquisition. Legal leverage alone produces litigation. Attachment must be reframed as instability, then monetized through forced stewardship. Relationship-first acquisition. That was his term for marriage. I did not cry when I read it. I sat very still and felt a part of myself that had been soft for too long become something else. Mira's eyes went bright. Now we bury him in his own language. The trap we built after that was simple in theory and nauseating in practice. We let him think he was winning. Owen proceeded with the board push, but I stopped fighting publicly. I withdrew objections on minor items. I let him secure provisional authority over certain reserve functions. I missed one meeting citing therapy. I wore pale colors. I spoke less. I let mutual acquaintances carry the story that the miscarriage had hit Nora harder than anyone realized. It was the most humiliating acting I have ever done, and it worked because he had already written that version of me. Meanwhile, Gabriel tracked the money. Neil Harrow, the accountant, was routing advisory fees through layered LLCs that tied back to post-transition buyers, and confirmed side arrangements rewarding him for valuations that supported urgent stewardship events. Urgent stewardship events. That was their phrase for pushing a woman toward losing what she loved. The final piece came from the one man I had once dismissed as obsolete. Martin Keene. He called me on a Sunday, voice crisp as ever. Miss Bellamy, I believe I have found why your husband was so content to accept the revised prenuptial. When I got to his office, he had 3 binders open. You recall, he said, that I insisted on language preserving Bellamy House as your separate inherited property. I do. He accepted that because he never meant to claim the house directly. He meant to starve it of its veins. He pointed to linked structures. Operating revenue, reserve capitalization, licensing rights, event branding, future development options, all routed into entities capable of governance shift. The house would remain yours, while its ability to live, scale, repair, and survive migrated elsewhere. It was theft by abstraction. Martin removed his glasses and looked at me with something like grief. He did not need to take the portrait off the wall if he could remove the nails holding the room together. That insight became the spine of our case. The hearing where everything detonated was set for a Thursday in late October. By then, rumors were moving through Charleston the way expensive rumors always do, discreetly but with excellent shoes. Some people thought I was unstable. Some thought Owen had nobly tolerated more than any husband should. Some thought I had married badly and was now paying the tax women pay when they confuse attention with character. I let them talk. That morning I wore cream, not black. It made me look softer, more breakable, Mira approved. Today, she said in the courthouse restroom while reapplying lipstick with military focus, we let him laugh first. He did. Kroll opened strong. He painted me as grieving, erratic, overly attached to a business I no longer had the emotional stamina to govern. He praised Owen's restraint, his professionalism, his repeated attempts to create protective structure around a beloved but financially vulnerable property. Owen himself testified with practiced sadness. He said he loved me. He said he's still worried about me. He said this action was never about punishment, only preservation. At one point, when he described me, weeping in a supply closet because a florist changed peony shades, a few people in the gallery actually smiled in pity. Then Mira stood. She did not begin with me. She began with a spreadsheet. Not because spreadsheets are dramatic, but because predators always underestimate how fatal boring evidence can be. She walked the court through fee transfers, shell entities, timeline overlaps, advisory repetitions, and undisclosed prior relationships among supposedly independent actors. Kroll objected. The judge overruled enough to keep the room hot. Then came the deposition excerpts. Then the copied medical language. Then the side payment trail. Then the metadata. Kroll's confidence began to fray around the edges. Owen kept his face composed. He still believed, I think, that the damage was technical, manageable, that he could out-lawyer structure questions because he had built the structure. Then Mira asked permission to enter one final exhibit. The black ledger. It wasn't really a ledger. It was the printed version of the conversion timing memo, combined with internal target profiles and annotated engagement summaries Gabriel had recovered from Celia's drive. Kroll objected so fast he nearly stumbled over the words. Unverified, Prejudicial? Sensational? Mira's expression didn't move. It was recovered from the respondent's private advisory archive, cross-authenticated through metadata, payment records, and witness testimony. The only thing sensational about it is the content. Judge Pike took the binder. She read silently. The whole courtroom went still in that way rooms only do when every person inside them can feel another person's life-changing direction. Then she made the softest strangled sound. Not shock. A laugh. Small at first. Disbelieving. Then sharper. That was the moment from the beginning. The moment his smile died. Your Honor, Kroll said tightly. May I ask what exactly? She held up a hand. Eyes. Kroll's face emptied. Mira's voice cut clean through the silence. We are, Your Honor. It appears to be the respondent's internal term for marrying women whose inherited assets present high emotional attachment and therefore require intimacy before conversion. A sound moved through the gallery, not loud, but collective. Human disgust discovering company. Owen stood. This is absurd. Sit down, Judge Pike snapped. He sat. Mira didn't stop. She never once raised her voice. She walked the court through the target code names: Harbor, Vineyard, Thoroughbred. She introduced Celia's affidavit. She introduced the Lexington and Napa patterns. She introduced Martin's analysis showing why the prenup preserved the real estate while the linked entities siphoned away its economic life. She introduced Janine's printout about transition optics. She introduced the message about my grief. A one unstable after loss, increased dependence, delay resistance discussion until medical narrative settles. The words hung in the room like a smell. For the first time, Owen looked at me directly. Not warmly, not strategically, not with the cool superiority that had haunted me for months. He looked at me like a man discovering the wall he had leaned on was not a wall but a door, and it had just opened behind him. Kroll tried to recover. He argued context. Draft language, consultant shorthand, theoretical frameworks, overinterpretation. But context is a fragile defense when the pattern stretches across states and bank accounts. Then Mira delivered the line I had whispered in panic weeks earlier and barely remembered. My client was never your wife in his business model, Your Honor. She was a timed conversion event. Even Kroll winced. Judge Pike ordered a recess. In the hallway, Charleston society pretended not to stare, and failed magnificently. One woman near the vending machine was openly crying. A local banker I'd known since I was 15 wouldn't meet my eyes. Janine squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Tessa leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the other side of the hall where Owen was speaking in clipped fury to Kroll. He's done, she said. Not yet. No, she agreed, gaze flat. But he knows what done smells like now. The ruling that afternoon was not the final legal ending, but it was the real public death. Judge Pike froze enforcement of every disputed agreement tied to Bellamy House, Mercer Strategic, and the legacy trust structure. She appointed a special fiduciary monitor. She referred portions of the record for criminal review regarding fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. She sanctioned Kroll's side for discovery abuse. Most importantly for me, she restored my full executive authority over Bellamy House pending final adjudication. Owen did not look at me when the order was read. He left the courtroom through a side door like smoke fleeing a cracked window. The next months were ugly, expensive, and glorious in the least cinematic way possible. There was no single thunderclap. There was excavation. Civil actions multiplied. The criminal review widened. Mercer's strategic clients from 2 states came forward through counsel. Curtis Vale quietly attempted to distance himself, which did not work because paperwork has a stronger memory than cowardice. Dr. Tormey's license review began. Neil Harrow negotiated furiously. Kroll withdrew as counsel once the potential criminal exposure sharpened into specifics. And Bellamy House? Bellamy House kept breathing. That mattered more to me than revenge, though revenge helped. Reggie returned to full authority and accounting with the vindictive joy of a man whose distrust had been historically correct. Janine told the staff the truth in careful stages, enough to explain without traumatizing. We discovered the reserve accounts were bruised but not fatal. Vendor trust, once I personally called the ones who mattered, came back faster than I expected. Apparently competence paired with survival reads stronger than scandal if you hold eye contact long enough. The hardest part was the house itself. For months after Owen moved out, Bellamy House felt contaminated by interpretation. The widow's walk where he proposed, the kitchen where he held me after the miscarriage, the downstairs office where we planned Christmas menus and future renovations and names for a child who never stayed. Every room held 2 histories, and I had to choose which one got to remain. So I changed nothing at first. That surprised people. They expected me to repaint, renovate, purge, stage some symbolic cleanse. I didn't. I let the rooms stay exactly as they were while I walked through them and reclaimed them inch by inch. Not because I am saintly. Because I was tired of men turning women's homes into evidence of women's fragility. I refused to make my recovery look decorative. The final divorce hearing came 8 months after the first hearing. By then, Owen looked older. Not ruined exactly. Men like him are too structurally defended to ruin quickly. But the polish had thinned. He carried fatigue at the mouth. His suit fit the same. The certainty didn't. He was offered a settlement route twice. He declined. Probably because admitting the model would have exposed him more broadly. Pride is expensive. He had spent mine first. Now he was spending his own. Mira's closing argument was almost boring, which is how you know it was lethal. She laid out fraud in the inducement, intentional emotional exploitation, governance capture through undisclosed conflict, and a marriage entered under false purpose. She did not need flourish. She had record. When it was my turn to testify again, I kept it simple. I loved him, I said. That is true. I trusted him. That is true. I also now understand that the systems he proposed were never neutral. They were designed so I could keep the appearance of ownership while losing the power to protect what mattered. He did not misunderstand my grief. He monetized it. The silence after that felt different from the first hearing. Not suspense. Recognition. Judge Pike's final order invalidated the contested trust modifications, voided Owen's claimed marital interests in Bellamy House-related structures tainted by fraud, awarded fees, imposed restitution measures tied to diverted reserves, and referred additional findings to state and federal authorities. Some connected matters would take longer. The machine was bigger than one marriage, but the marriage itself, legally and morally, was over. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited because by then the story had escaped Charleston and become catnip for every outlet that loves money, marriage, and a respectable monster. I said one sentence. Legacy is not whatever a predator can invoice. Then I got into Tessa's car and laughed until I cried, because it was either that or collapse. A year later, Bellamy House looked almost exactly the same from the street. That was my favorite part. Tourists still took pictures under the iron gate. Brides still gasped when they saw the courtyard lights come on at dusk. The restaurant still overbooked Saturday brunch and lied about wait times with smiling faces. The East Garden expansion my mother had wanted finally happened, not because a man optimized it into a deck, but because I chose the timing and paid for it without asking permission from anybody who spoke in euphemism. I also made changes no guest could see. I restructured governance so no single advisor could quietly consolidate operational arteries away from the core asset again. I created an independent oversight board with actual independence, not golf partner theater. I funded staff legal training around document authority and coercive management tactics. I started a small foundation in my mother's name to provide legal and forensic support to owners of family-run hospitality businesses facing predatory restructuring. Tessa called it my absolutely not fund. She wasn't wrong. As for Owen, pieces of his world kept coming loose. The criminal side moved slower than gossip and faster than he deserved. Mercer Strategic effectively died. Curtis Vale settled civil exposure under terms that included enough disclosure to make future clients scarce. Tormey's professional discipline became public record. Harrow cooperated so enthusiastically, he practically developed a conversion narrative of his own. Celia eventually testified under protective arrangements and looked relieved in a way that made me wonder how many people had been waiting for one woman to stop apologizing before they could start telling the truth. I saw Owen one final time 18 months after the first hearing. Not in court. At Bellamy House. It was late afternoon in early spring. The azaleas were beginning to show. I was in the courtyard reviewing table layouts for a charity dinner, when Janine came to me with the expression staff reserved for only two things: fire or awkwardness. He's here. I knew who she meant. He was standing just inside the gate in a plain coat. No entourage, no legal pad, no battlefield. I walked over, not fast, not slowly, just enough to let him wait. You can't be on the property without notice, I said. His mouth twitched. Still direct. Still trespassing. He looked thinner. More human. Less dangerous. Which is not the same as safe. I'm not here to fight. That's because fighting here stopped going well for you. A flicker of something passed over his face. Irritation, maybe. Or admiration. With men like Owen, the two are often roommates. He looked around the courtyard. The lights, the fountain, the ivy just beginning to wake along the brick. You kept it. I almost laughed. Of course I kept it. He nodded slowly. I thought maybe after everything, you thought maybe I'd turn my own house into proof you mattered. That landed. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets. I wanted to say, I misjudged you. There it was. Not apology, assessment. No, I said. You judged me perfectly. You just believed being loved made me easy to erase. For the first time since I'd known him, he had no immediate answer. The fountain murmured between us. Somewhere inside, glasses clinked. Life continuing, gloriously uninterested in our scene. Did you ever love me? I asked. People always think that question is about closure. It isn't. It's about classification. He looked at me for a long time. In my way, he said. I smiled then. Not warmly, not bitterly, just with the clear, calm recognition you feel when the final missing tile in a pattern slides into place. That, I said, was always the problem. I stepped back and called to the front desk to have security walk Mr. Mercer out. He did not resist. He did not plead. He left through the gate the way all fraud leaves eventually, less elegant in daylight. That night, after the charity dinner, I climbed to the Widow's Walk alone. The harbor was black glass under the moon. The city lights trembled on the water. I could hear laughter from below, staff stacking chairs, somebody in the kitchen dropping a tray and swearing creatively enough to make my mother proud. I stood where he had once proposed and felt nothing break. That was the payoff. Not revenge, not even justice, though that mattered. The payoff was absence, the clean, startling absence of his interpretation in my own mind. The place where his voice used to explain me had gone quiet. Below me was the inn my mother saved, the inn he tried to hollow out, the inn still standing with all its inconvenient heart intact. People love dramatic endings because they think survival should look like a line in the sand. It rarely does. Sometimes it looks like payroll clearing on time, a roof repaired properly, staff laughing in a kitchen you still own, a contract reviewed twice because you finally learned that love and paperwork should never share a blindfold. Sometimes it looks like a woman on a rooftop, ringless, unwitnessed, finally understanding that being targeted was not proof she was foolish. It was proof she had something worth stealing and, better than that, something worth defending. I went back downstairs, locked my office, and turned out the hall light myself. The house slept around me, old and stubborn and mine. If you stayed to the end, tell me the moment you knew Owen was a predator, and follow for more stories where the softest-looking person in the room ends up being the one nobody can bury. In the weeks after the final order, the city treated me like a public test case. Some people admired me in the shallow, consumable way people admire women once the danger has become content. Some avoided me because scandal is catchy to the superstitious. Some offered apologies disguised as compliments. I always knew there had to be more to the story. No, you didn't. You just waited to see who won before deciding what you had always known. The local business paper ran a tasteful piece about governance lessons for family-owned hospitality assets. A national magazine wanted photographs of me standing in front of Bellamy House looking resolute but not bitter. A podcast host asked whether I thought women should avoid marrying financially sophisticated men. I declined that one because stupidity with a microphone does not become depth by putting the word women in front of it. The damage Owen had done was legal, financial, intimate, and oddly architectural. He had not merely tried to acquire Bellamy House. He had spent years narrating it back to me, until my own instincts sounded amateur in my head. Undoing that took longer than court orders. For months I couldn't review any contract after 10 at night without feeling my chest tighten. I flinched when new advisors used the words optimize, continuity, leverage, or stewardship. I stopped signing anything the same day I received it. Reggie considered that my first truly healthy habit. Then there was the problem of trust. Not the legal kind, the breathing kind. Janine stayed, Reggie stayed, Eric stayed, most of the staff stayed, but every system Owen had touched felt contaminated by possibility. I had to decide, again and again, whether every efficient suggestion was manipulation in nicer shoes or simply a good idea said by the wrong kind of person. Trauma is expensive that way. It taxes judgment even after danger leaves the room. So I rebuilt procedure before I rebuilt comfort. No advisory engagement without full conflict disclosure. No mental health language in governance documents unless independently reviewed. No emergency authority expansion tied to vague impairment language. No consultant-approved board nominee without prior relationship mapping. No reserve transfers without dual sign-off and delayed execution notice. It looked obsessive on paper. In practice, it felt like oxygen. The first major test came at Christmas. Bellamy House's holiday season was always ridiculous. Corporate buyouts, surprise proposals, families trying to heal themselves with expensive brunch, twinkle lights tasteful enough to impress old money, and bright enough to satisfy tourists from Ohio. My mother had loved December because she said it turned hospitality into theater and nobody minded the costume change. That year I considered canceling half the programming, not because we lacked demand, because I was tired in the marrow and I did not want my face in any more photographs than strictly necessary. Janine refused to let me shrink. "If you disappear now," she said, standing in my doorway with a stack of event menus and the implacable posture of a woman who had survived too many brides to fear one broken owner, "the story becomes that he almost destroyed the season. I will not give that man Christmas." So we kept it all. The wreath workshops, the candlelit chamber concert, the black tie New Year's dinner in the courtyard under heated tents and enough imported greenery to offend a botanist. And the city came. They came curious, guilty, supportive, nosy, defensive, eager to witness whether Bellamy House still felt like Bellamy House. They came because ruin is entertaining, but endurance is magnetic when served with bourbon maple pecan pie. On the night of the New Year's dinner, I stood in the service corridor for one quiet minute before guests were seated and listened to the whole property hum, cutlery, low music, kitchen calls, heaters clicking on, distant laughter floating through old brick and winter air. Not one piece of that sound belonged to Owen. He had passed through it, yes. He had tried to rewrite it, but he had not built it, and in the end he had not kept it alive. At midnight, when the champagne went up and the band kicked into a reckless old soul standard, Tessa found me near the back staircase and handed me a coupe glass. "To surviving polite monsters," she said. I clinked it. "And to ugly paperwork." She grinned. "My favorite genre." The next blow came from a source I should have expected. Donors. Not all of them. The wrong kind. A private foundation in Palm Beach that had been considering a preservation partnership with us requested a risk review meeting in January. That phrase alone made my skin crawl, but the money mattered. The project was large. Shoreline reinforcement, archival restoration, staff housing improvements. Real work. My mother would have wanted it. So I went. Their chairwoman was elegant, expensive, and too fascinated by liability language. 10 minutes into the meeting she asked, with terrible gentleness, "Have you considered whether your personal profile now introduces reputational unpredictability for long-horizon capital?" I looked at her and understood exactly what she was doing. Same tactic. Cleaner gloves. Not "Are you competent? Will your public survival make our money look nervous?" I smiled. "If by unpredictability you mean I no longer allow sophisticated men to launder control through concern, then yes. That has probably narrowed my appeal among a certain class of coward." Her general counsel dropped his pen. "We got the funding anyway. Apparently backbone photographs well in minutes once the room understands you know what they're implying." By spring, something else began to happen. Women started arriving early for check-in and finding reasons to linger. Owners of small inns in Savannah, vineyard operators from Virginia, a woman from Maine who ran a family marina, a second-generation restaurateur from New Orleans. They would mention the weather, the room, the breakfast biscuits, and then, while pretending not to, ask whether I had time for one quick question. Usually the question was not quick. It was some version of this. "How did you know? How did you know the helpful man in the expensive jacket was not simply more organized than you, more strategic than you, more emotionally disciplined than you? How did you know the document was a door and not a shelter? How did you know you were not overreacting, misreading, dramatizing, punishing competence because it arrived in a masculine voice you resented?" I answered as honestly as I could. I didn't know all at once. I knew in pieces. I knew when every solution required me to become less visible inside my own life. I knew when my grief kept being translated into governance opportunity. I knew when his calm improved in direct proportion to my confusion. I knew when every objection I raised became evidence of why I should have less authority. I knew when paperwork started sounding like a personality assessment. I knew when the future he promised me kept requiring less of me, until I was almost gone. Sometimes the women cried. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they sat up straighter with the haunted look of somebody recognizing her own house described by a stranger. Those conversations changed me more than the press ever could. They made the whole thing feel less like an isolated nightmare, and more like part of a language women have been forced to learn in whispers. A language of being told that attachment is instability, caution is ingratitude, expertise is hysteria if it arrives wearing mascara. That was when I understood the foundation could not stay small. So we expanded it. Not into something glossy or self-congratulatory. Into something useful. A hotline answered by actual humans, not motivational slogans. A referral network of litigators, accountants, governance reviewers, and trauma-informed clinicians. Emergency contract review for family-owned legacy businesses under relationship pressure. Mini-grants for owners needing independent document analysis before signing protective restructurings. Training modules for staff on coercive management language. Reggie said the operation was beginning to resemble a very angry Girl Scout troop with document retention standards. I took that as praise. Not every day was strong. Some nights grief still blindsided me from nowhere. Not for Owen. For the baby. For my mother. For the version of myself who had once believed being deeply understood was automatically safe. There were mornings I woke furious that recovery was so administrative. Therapy appointments. Compliance forms. Revised bylaws. Bank confirmations. Emotional cleanup disguised as office work. Survival after betrayal is often just a stack of calendar invites nobody claps for. But the clapping did come once, unexpectedly, in the place I least anticipated it. The Preservation Society invited me back to speak at the same annual gala where I had met Owen. I almost said no. Then I remembered the hallway. The crab cake line. The first crack in my guard that had felt like relief. And I realized I wanted the room back. So I said yes. The courtyard looked almost identical to that first night. White lights, fountain, old money pretending not to check one another's jewelry. But I was not the same woman moving through it, and the room knew it. You could feel the recalibration. Not pity now. Not curiosity alone. Respect braided with discomfort, which is usually how truth enters elegant places. When I took the podium, I did not tell the whole story. The whole story belonged to me, but I told enough. I spoke about preservation not as nostalgia, but as refusal. I spoke about how old structures are lost less often to storms than to reasonable people with elegant plans. I spoke about the danger of letting outsiders define sentiment as weakness, when sentiment is often the very thing that keeps a place alive. I spoke about my mother. I spoke about Bellamy House. I spoke about the cost of believing that efficiency and care are the same thing. Then I looked out over the courtyard and said, the easiest thing in the world is to take over a legacy property after you've persuaded everyone around it that the woman protecting it is too emotional to be trusted. The harder thing is to admit how often our systems reward the person making that argument. Nobody moved. Good. Because I did not want applause first. I wanted discomfort. Then the applause came anyway. Loud, uneven, real. Afterward, an elderly donor with pearls the size of marbles took my hand and said, my first husband tried to sell my father's newspaper while telling me I needed a rest. I was too ashamed to call it theft. Thank you for saying it in public. That was the moment I understood something I wish more women were told young. Predators do not rely only on secrecy. They rely on our embarrassment, on our reluctance to sound dramatic, on our fear of looking foolish for loving something in public. Once embarrassment leaves the table, they lose half their tools. By the second anniversary of the divorce filing, Bellamy House had not merely recovered, it had sharpened. Occupancy was up. The East Garden hosted its first spring wedding under climbing jasmine. The Candle Line now funded staff emergency grants. The Shoreline project broke ground. Janine was promoted with enough authority to frighten weak men on contact. Reggie finally accepted accounting software upgrades after making me sign a handwritten note promising never to call him digital. One afternoon, while reviewing roofline work from the courtyard, I heard a new housekeeper explaining the property to a guest. That's the Widow's Walk, she said, pointing up. Best view in the city if you ask me. Owner goes up there sometimes when she wants to think. The guest asked, does she live here? The housekeeper smiled. No, she owns it. Different thing. I went back to my invoices with a grin so sudden it startled me. She was right. Different thing. For a long time, Owen had counted on me feeling like caretaker, steward, daughter, widow of a future that never happened, temporary vessel for inherited responsibility. All those words are close to ownership, but not identical. They all make a woman sound noble and exhausted, which is ideal if you're planning to talk her out of power. Owning, I learned, is colder and cleaner than devotion. It is signatures and nerve, boundaries and backups. The willingness to be called difficult by people who benefit from your softness. The refusal to translate your own instincts into gentler language just because the room prefers women blurred at the edges. By the time I saw Owen that last afternoon at the gate, all of that was already true. That is why his final visit failed. He was speaking to a version of me that no longer lived there. And that, more than the rulings or the sanctions or the newspaper headlines, was the real ending. He had lost access. Not to the property. To the version of me who would ever again confuse being chosen with being safe.